I'm Umbrian Libris. Have you ever wondered what Pokemon would be like in real life? Of course you have. Everyone has. But when we talk about realistic Pokemon, there's a few different things we could be talking about. There's many different approaches to realistic Pokemon. So I spoke to a couple of people who work somewhere in that realm.
My name is Joshua Dunlop. I'm a freelance concept artist, particularly known for my work, or personal work, on a project called Pokémon Zoology, which I've been doing for about 4 years now, I think. Basically, the concept is that I take Pokemon and, you know, give them a little realistic overhaul to see what they might look like in reality.
If you're interested in realistic Pokemon, there's a good chance you already know some of Joshua's work. And I also spoke to a friend of mine.
Hi, my name is Primitiva, and I make videos on Pokemon, but I also make videos specifically about the biology of Pokemon. And what I like to do is I like to take the biology more seriously, I guess, like in a more realistic way.
Primitiva recently started a series on her channel where she creates realistic Pokemon through speculative evolution, which is a really unique approach. But we'll go more into hers and Joshua's works in a moment, because I actually want to start by talking about Detective Pikachu, the movie, of course, because it's the most mainstream of what might be considered realistic Pokemon, and I think it actually represents one extreme of that realistic spectrum. I'm not sure if you've noticed this, but Pokemon is not very realistic. And I mean that in multiple ways, but in particular in the creature designs. Pokemon are cartoon creatures, meaning that their proportions and their biologies don't have to be thought through in a way that makes scientific sense. And I don't just mean because of their magical side, like psychic-type Pokemon being able to float. I mean like how their heads and their eyes are enormous, or how some of them couldn't really support their own weight, or even walk properly, and things like that. A truly realistic take on Pokemon would have to account for that, but the designs in the Detective Pikachu movie don't.
I don't think Detective Pikachu is, like, really that realistic. I mean, none of them look like they would actually exist in real life, except maybe, like, some of the bird Pokemon, maybe.
They are essentially cartoons that are rendered realistically with, like, realistic fur and detail and stuff like that.
And for some of us, and I'll include myself in that was a bit disappointing, because we expected, or at least we wanted, the Pokemon to look a little bit more like animals, the kinds of real-life animals that we see every day. But there's good reason not to go in that direction.
You have to remember that, you know, they are dealing with a very, very large and very opinionated fan base. It would be very dangerous for them to push going into a more realistic animation style, purely because, I mean, you know, Sonic the Hedgehog is a prime example. It's they tried to push it in one direction. I mean, it looked horrific, but then you could possibly say that about some of my artwork, you know, that it just, because you have a fond memory or a fond idea of what those Pokemon are supposed to be and what they're supposed to look like, that if it looks too far into a realistic area, it becomes jarring and frustrating.
By taking the sort of Alvin and the Chipmunks approach and making Pokemon that are basically just realistic renditions of exactly the designs we already know, they make sure that the Pokemon in the movie are immediately recognizable, and they stay consistent with the designs that have already been in use in every other medium, which is important for keeping your cute creatures nice and merchandisable. But that's not enough for a lot of us. We want to see more realism than that. And that's where artists like Joshua Dunlop come in. Joshua's Pokemon designs are still pretty recognizable, but he does take a few liberties in favor of realism.
Everything in Pokemon is simplified, but it's simplified to a point where the anatomy doesn't work anymore. For example, if you look at Charmeleon, it just kind of has 3 spikes for fingers. So there's no dexterity there, it can't do anything. So yeah, in my latest Charmeleon picture, I gave it fingers, essentially, to give it a little bit more dexterity and make it feel like it's a little bit more realistic.
But striking that balance between the cartoon creature anatomy and the anatomy of something that could actually exist in our world can be a big challenge.
it's hard at times. It really is, because some of them don't make any sense, and like anatomically. For example, Mankey is literally a head with arms and legs sticking out the side of it. There's a lot of Pokemon that is kind of like just basically ignores physics. And I do try and ground it a little bit more, and try and make them feel like they could exist in a world rather than it being a world with humans living with kind of cartoons, if that makes sense.
Some Pokemon have elements that simply cannot be real, and so some sacrifices have to be made. Either you're going to take something away from the Pokemon and just ignore that as a property in your design, or you're going to have to accept that that part is not going to look or be realistic.
In certain elements, it does simply come down to, you know, what is the silhouette, what makes the Pokemon recognizable. I'm currently redoing the second evolutions of the starter generation, and when I look back at my originals, they are very I've pushed the anatomy far closer to real animals, to the point where they're not necessarily immediately recognizable. Charmander, for example, I see Charmander as a small dinosaur. They're dragons, you know, they're dinosaur-y like dragons. So I really push the dinosaur in there, and I've noticed a lot of people go, oh, well, you know, it doesn't really look like Charmander, except for the fact that, you know, it's orange and has a fire on its tail. And even though I really did enjoy the first pictures that I did, it was early days. I was just kind of doing it for a bit of fun. Whereas now, you know, I have this whole project, and I've kind of found this style where it's a in-between between, you know, reality and the cartoon. I've seen a lot of artists out there who do realistic Pokemon, and they're all wonderful, and they all have their own different styles, but a lot of them kind of stray away from what the original really looked like. And I think when you're trying to do a reinterpretation or a revisualization, you want people to be able to look at it and go, oh, that's that, straight away. So I'd like, you know, as things have gone on, I've kind of developed to lean more towards the original silhouettes and everything like that. I try not to get rid of too much of the original designs because, as I said, it's about the silhouette, it's about them being recognizable. But I think there are definitely elements where I can add detail.
Other artists are willing to sacrifice much more from the original Pokemon designs in favor of realism. If you look at the work of R.J. Palmer, for example, also known as Arvalis, these designs depart a lot more from the originals. They're still recognizable, but not quite as much. They're much more animalistic, much more based in real-life anatomy. But to be honest, this approach isn't quite what I would call realistic either. Because as realistic as the creatures might look, Detective Pikachu and Joshua and Arvalis and many others still give the Pokemon their magical abilities. All of their Charizards still have fire on their tails. Which is why I was really excited when Prima Diva started her Speculative Evolution series. Speculative evolution is a way of imagining how creatures might live and evolve with a very strong grounding in real-world science. So what Prima Diva does with Pokemon is pick a real animal and then try to imagine how it might evolve over time to develop the characteristics of the Pokemon in question.
The hardest thing is actually thinking about the path I want to take. Because, like, yeah, you need to make a Pokemon real. What are you going to do? What animal are you going to use? What evolutionary history are you going to have? Is it realistic? Are there better candidates, you know? And that's a lot of thought that goes into that thinking process. And it can take a long while. Sometimes I ask people, sometimes I go on, like, the Speculative Evolution Reddit. Because a lot of people have this very specific idea how they would think of a Pokemon in real life. And I don't do this on purpose, but I just sometimes get to a whole other idea that I think makes more sense. Like with the Charizard one, right? Like everyone, like a lot of people were like, oh, you're going to make it a hexapod, right? You're going to make it like a gliding lizard. And someone was like, what if you have it like have muscles that like somehow develop flight and they get another set of appendages? And I was like, no, we don't have a basis for that. And that's what's really important when it comes to speculative evolution itself, I think, is that there has to be a basis in reality.
Prima has only covered 2 Pokemon so far, Venusaur and Charizard, so we talked a lot about Charizard because I thought that was the one that she really nailed. Here's what she told me about the process of trying to figure out how to evolve a Charizard from a real-life animal.
When I make Pokemon real, I like to think of them as animals and just things that just exist, and they're not there to scare you or specifically to harm you unless you harm them. I feel like a lot of people are just tied up with like all the creepy Pokedex entries, and they're like, ooh, what if we make that like even scarier? And I feel like that's a cool approach, but that's not something I would take, because animals, they're not like that. They're not creepy on purpose. Well, I mean, some are. With Charizard, it was definitely like, I was thinking like, how do I make it have 6 limbs, right? That's what I was thinking of. But then I kept thinking like, wait a second, if 6 limbs would actually exist in our world, there would be fossil records of it. It would be a thing. But they're not, because tetrapods just work a whole lot better with energy. They're much more energy efficient. And I was like, you know what? Let's make it a wyvern. Let's just make a wyvern. And I thought, it's clearly a reptile, so we'll start with that.
Oh, I should also point out that although Prima is the one doing the speculation and figuring out how to evolve real animals into Pokemon, the art is not hers.
I commissioned Dunlop, who is actually a pretty famous artist, as far as I'm aware, in the speculative evolution community.
And naturally, Dylan Baja ends up having an influence on how these Pokemon turn out, like how he changed Charizard's wings.
I was originally going to have it like bats, where they have one finger sticking out, the thumb, but he actually, when I told him about that, he actually drew 2 fingers. He thought that would be a good idea for like actually being able to hang onto the trees with 2 fingers. When still in the transition from climbing in the trees to flying. And I actually thought that was really cool. I actually changed my script literally because he said that. Like, obviously he knows a lot about the speculative evolution kind of stuff, so I took his advice as golden. As
with every other way of making realistic Pokemon, the speculative evolution approach still has to contend with the magical side of Pokemon. And that might be even more of a challenge here because... yeah,
magic doesn't exist, so we don't really have, we do have electric eels, which are very cool, but like something like fire breathing, you're gonna take a lot of things into consideration. Like dragons, like they would never work in real life because, first of all, you'd have 6 limbs, which is a lot of energy. Flying is a lot of energy. Breathing fire on top of that, that's even more energy.
So, unfortunately, the compromises here can be pretty darn significant. If you can't have a Charizard with a flaming tail, what can you have?
If I can't copy a Pokemon's magical ability in real life, I'll just think like, okay, what makes it look like that? What makes it resemble that? So when you look at it, you're still like, oh yeah, that's Charizard.
I don't think that any of these approaches are necessarily better or worse than any others. Well, actually, that's not true, because I do think there are approaches that are bad. One that I have seen a lot, but really don't like, is where you make Pokemon realistic by basically turning it into a horror movie monster. So sure, you've rendered it in a realistic way, but you've strayed so far from the original Pokemon without making it more like a realistic animal that calling it a realistic Pokemon feels disingenuous. If you like the horror monster aesthetic, by all means, go ahead, draw, and enjoy your creepy Pokemon, but at least call it what it is, which is not realistic Pokemon. Personally, I'm a big fan of the speculative evolution approach because you strictly ground your designs in real life, and you even give the thing a whole evolutionary history, which I think is really freaking cool. But I also think that's not quite a Pokemon anymore. Pokemon are, like, by definition, magical creatures. So by completely removing that element, you're also not quite making a truly realistic Pokemon. I don't know that I've ever seen a take on realistic Pokemon that actually finds that balance between cartoon magical creature and real-life plausible animal in a way that I find truly satisfactory. But I also don't know if that's possible. And it's almost certainly not possible to find that balance in a way that will be universally accepted. So let me know in the comments what your preferences are for realistic takes on Pokemon. What are you looking for? And make sure to check the description for all of the art that I used in this video, and if you're not following them already, please do go follow Joshua Dunlop and Prima Diva. I have included a whole bunch of their social medias in the description. And Prima Diva's take on Blastoise is actually scheduled to come out tomorrow, if you're watching this the day that it comes out, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you for watching, and thank you again to Prima Diva and Joshua Dunlop for taking the time to speak with me. And thank you, of course, to my patrons, especially luxury patron Ethan Saffron. I'm Umbreon Libris, and I'll see you in the next chapter. I'm Umbreon Libris. I'll speak to you